Hey everyone, and welcome again to another episode of the Layoff Legends podcast, where we come together to listen to layoff stories and relevant expertise with a focus on finding inspiration, encouragement, and guidance for the laid off tech community and hopefully beyond. My name is Leo, a former Microsoft Principal PM that was laid off last October, and I am delighted to bring another special guest to the pod today, who I am privileged to call a dear friend of mine. Dana, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Leo. Thank you for inviting me. I'm super excited to be here.
For those of you who don't know Diana's work, she is a powerhouse leader and visionary in the business product and sales strategy space with over 15 years experience in large companies like Microsoft, Amazon, and Google. She's been a driving force behind tremendous revenue growth and innovative partnerships that have reshaped these entire industries. And one of the things I love about Dana is she doesn't just strategize and then toss us over the fence. She translates those things that are incredibly complex and ambiguous business problems into really tangible outcomes. And as she looks at GTM initiatives, these have built over a $10 billion in incremental pipeline and generated over $500 million in net new sales. Dana has built and nurtured dynamic ecosystems of channel partners and solution providers, driving more than 130% year-over-year growth. She has played an integral role in enabling a staggering $90 billion in commercial revenue. Known for a no-nonsense, action-first approach, Dana has inspired peers like myself and empowered leaders along the way, always keeping insights on the future while never losing touch with the day-to-day details that fuel success. She's here to share her experience from her layoff journey and beyond. Diana, welcome again to the Layoff Legends podcast.
Thank you, Leo. I need a recording of that. I'm going to play that in my daily affirmations. I,
You're so welcome. So let's jump in. We talk about layoff experiences. And so we normally start there. This helps us set the context for folks, whether it's pre-layoff or they're experiencing layoff today. Could you give us an overview of your roles and responsibilities?
my role was really centered around sales technology and architecture. So think about the Microsoft ecosystem and everything across it that's needed to do and support the commercial business. My team was really focused on enabling that business and building all of the infrastructure, the processes, the reporting that would allow business with our biggest commercial customers. And so that's a $100 billion ecosystem there. Think of me as a hybrid product manager and a strategic advisor. So I would understand what are all the big initiatives and business problems that all of these leaders across the many business units across Microsoft were looking at, prioritizing. And then I would map that back to, well, what is the tech needed to enable that? I got to look across the entire business, which gave me a pretty large purview and a lot of opportunity to not only work with some pretty high stakes leaders, but also have some time to have my boots on the ground. So it was a really amazing opportunity.
Dana, when you talk about that, it's very tangible. You've talked about $100 billion pipeline. How did you manage the stress even before we get into the role itself?
I think that's one of those things that there's very few people that have really mastered. I will say that I don't think I quite did. There's a lot of pressure to deliver. This was circa 2021 is when I started, and my role was impacted within 18 months. And so this was when everyone was feeling the pressure to consolidate, to cost optimize, to do more with less. So the stress of having all of these executives coming to you and saying, I need X, Y, Z, and you having to give that with extremely minimal resources was really challenging. And it still puts a lot of strain and stress on you because you take your job very seriously. You have a lot of pride. So you want to deliver, you want to excel, but you don't necessarily feel like you're set up to do so.
That must have been tremendously stressful. And of course, that creates a culture. It creates a team. Could you talk a little bit about the culture on the team?
The team was formed with this intention of breaking down silos, bringing together all of the functions that support any kind of technology, process, and operations across this commercial business, which prior to the development of this team were all done separately. Each business unit kind of had their own ops and tech team that supported them. So it was a very, very, very fragmented ecosystem. So this team formed right when I joined the company. And for the first year, it was really just trying to calibrate ourselves and figure out what are we really doing. Right, we know what we want to accomplish, but we haven't even began to simulate a plan of what does that look like. When do we start to pivot if things aren't going according to plan? So I'd say the culture was a little chaotic. Everyone was feeling the pressure, but no one was really feeling like there was a true structure on how do we do this. And then what does that usually mean? It means that roles and responsibilities are not super clear. It's very ambiguous. We don't really have a defined RACI because these are new roles. Are you a product manager? Are you an architect? Are you go to market? Are you ops? You're doing a little bit of everything, but your role isn't completely defined. I think when people don't really quite understand where they fit in and how to distinguish themselves for the other person, it can create somewhat of a hostile environment.
This is something interesting because that dynamic often leads to many executive business decisions. Were there other reorgs that were happening at the time because of all this change?
I believe reorgs that were directly impacting my stakeholders, there was at least seven that happened during my time there. My team itself was rebranded and restructured multiple times. We went through three executive leadership changes during that time. So there was a lot. There was a lot of restructuring, a lot of shifting, and every time one of those shifts happen, you don't really understand what does this mean for what I'm expected to do. How should I adapt? And then also, what does this mean for me in terms of like job security? Both of those things remain extremely ambiguous during that process.
Wow. So, in the midst of all that chaos, could you walk us through your layoff experience and what happened there?
I remember the day, March 27th. I remember getting an email from my manager, and it was a calendar invite to have a conversation. And usually you expect calendar invites to have at least an hour heads up, whether if they're internal. So I jump on the call, and then of course the manager, it's HR on the call, and they say, "Hey, I just want to let you know you've been impacted, your role is eliminated. We're going to now read off of kind of structured official script that we have to. And then afterwards, we can have a conversation and kind of talk through about what that means."
How are you feeling as all this was happening?
The interesting thing is, I think I had a prepare for the worst, hope for the best attitude. I was not super happy in the role with the culture. So I think that on top of just the climate, on a weekly basis, you would hear of, hey, this department got dissolved. There was a reorg here and half the people are no longer there. It was just coming kind of in like a flood. Like, so you were almost bracing for impact during that time where you're like, not only could I be next, I think I'm going to be, and I have to kind of adjust and be okay with that. If I just randomly got laid off, I think it would have really just really hit me um, a little bit more aggressively. But at this time, you almost felt like you were bracing for impact because everybody knew that it could happen any day.
And so, in one way or another, you were expecting it or prepared for it.
Prepared is probably a strong term. You think it could happen, maybe it will happen, but until you kind of commit to that as like a true possibility and say, "Okay, what do I need to do that when it does happen, it doesn't burn so much?" No, I don't think I did my best to do that.
Well, I think the common experience from a lot of our speakers and listeners is just exactly that. One of our speakers talked about dodging it for a while. Now it's finally come into my neighborhood. And so I think that's kind of the reality that a lot of our listeners are facing. And so when you had that conversation, what did you do next?
What did I do next? I went and I told my husband. I was like, "Hey, I gotta let you know something. I just got laid off." And he was very caring, passionate, very supportive. And I think at that point I was more, no, 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 it's okay. Like, I'm not upset. I'm not hurt. Like, actually, I don't even have time for this sensitive conversation right now. I got to start messaging everyone that could potentially help me find a role on an adjacent team because I had this 90-day window to move internally without having to come in as an external candidate. So I have this advantage of still having 2 weeks where I have access to my resources. So we don't even need to have this conversation. And that's really how that went. I told him like stone cold face, it's fine. He was like, oh my God, so sorry, it's gonna be okay. Let me give you a hug. I'm like, I don't need a hug. I got this. I'm gonna figure it out. I'll be in another role in 2 weeks. So that's how that went. That's not what happened. I think it's a shock, right? It's a shock because at that time you don't feel you know what's going on, but you're really kind of you haven't really processed, and you also don't know what is the future going to be. Am I really going to find a role in 2 weeks, or am I going to still be kind of in this limbo for 2 more years? You don't know that, but you're latching on to the most positive out potential outcome, which is I'm just going to find another team internally in 2 weeks. It'll feel like nothing ever happened. And this actually could be a blessing because I didn't absolutely love working with this team. So maybe this is that nudge I needed to be more proactive.
So I love this experience because it's unique. You went straight into the tactical. You went, all right, what's
Oh,
next? No breathing, no reflection. You went straight in back to the job search.
yes.
If you look back and you're talking to past Diana, what would you do differently?
I think I would have told myself to embrace the opportunity to get off of autopilot. I'm used to starting my day at 8 and ending at 5, 6, sometimes 8, depending on whether it's a peak time. Always used to having tangible expectations and deliverables. And if you disrupt that, it's like, well, what do I do now? Like, who am I if I don't have this role? How do I identify outside of being employee at XYZ company? I don't think I quite knew how to function outside of that autopilot. And so I think I would tell myself, take a pause, take the opportunity to reset, reflect, like recalibrate yourself, and whether intentional or non intentional moment to find what energizes you, to maybe take a pivot on your function and your day to day and your scope, and make sure that it actually complements who you are and what inspires you. You've been doing this for long enough and you have enough of a foundation built up, network, skill set, competencies that you're going to be okay.
I think what you shared about getting off autopilot is so critical because the opportunity to say, hey, I was in this thing, but I didn't really like it. Now I actually have a chance to go find what I actually like. And sometimes it's hard when you've been listening to other voices. And so one of the things we've heard about consistently is that that break is so valuable towards setting up your next thing. Now, you sound 100% zen, 100% in control. You went straight back to your computer. Everything sounds like flowers and rainbows. Now, come on, was it like that? Or did you really have some moments? How did you go through that portion of this storm?
That didn't hit me until I could no longer log in and, directly ping someone and be like, hey, so you have a role, you're hiring, can we have a coffee chat? When all of those things were stripped away, I think that's when I really had that like initial shock of, oh, you no longer have a job. You no longer have an advantage as an internal candidate to find a job. You no longer have like a clear agenda. You're now in the wild just like everyone else who is looking for something. And now you're competing against this enormous flood of candidates out there. This is going to be a lot harder than you thought. During that time, there was over 100,000 layoffs across big tech. You have absolutely brilliant, qualified, unbelievable people now competing for the same jobs. That feeling of how do I differentiate myself? And then also the imposter syndrome is just absolutely magnified. Because anytime I've taken a role in the past, I've always come in with a little bit of imposter syndrome and kind of had to adjust. And first couple months, it's always like, oh, I'm not supposed to be here. Look at all these people with PhDs, Harvard graduates, MIT. They have this amazing story. I just got here through pure luck, chance, whatever it is. And then after a while, once you actually start in the day and day, and you're like, you're not really any better at this than I am. You just had a little bit of a better head start. but you're not delivering better, you're not more reliable, you're not problem solving better. No, I should be here. That imposter syndrome, though, just gets absolutely peaked during that time when you're now trying to find this role, but you're right back at with these same people who on paper look so much better than you, are more qualified than you, have better credentials than you. And I think that's when it started to really have a more of a mental erosion on me of, am I really that great? Am I ever going to be able to prove that I'm great if I can't even land a job because other people on paper are just look much better than I do?
You're tapping into something that is so powerful. When you look back at the impact of the experience, you start to doubt yourself. And then when you're trying to get into the room for the next role, you're facing a self identity, imposter syndrome kind of struggle.
Yeah, that was probably the most challenging part, Leo. The hardest thing to do was to be able to have enough confidence in yourself where that can be conveyed when you're trying to land another role. When you get to an interview, you have to be able to convince this other person that you're the best person for the job. And part of that is also you have to believe that you're the best person for the job. And if that's not being portrayed in your narrative, your attitude, then it's very unlikely that you're going to convince them and they're going to offer you something. That was very hard. It was very, very hard. And the more rejections you get, the more you kind of start to question, like, well, how did I get that job at Microsoft, Amazon? Like, should I have ever been there? Was that pure luck? Was that pure chance? Was I just really fortunate that I just kind of figured it out while I was there? But realistically, all these other people are going to have so much of an easier transition because they have all of these additional variables that give them an advantage. So it's tough. That's probably the hardest part of that experience.
For folks who are going through this struggle with imposter syndrome, what would you tell them, especially as they start to apply to other companies?
I, I would encourage them to remember the times in their roles where they felt like they really excelled and they were really like the absolute like best person for the job. And they felt like empowered, they felt like a superstar. And I would tell them to tap into that feeling and think about what it would be like to repeat that again. When you have the right environment, you have the right support, you have the right scope, you have the right function. When all those variables are present, what are you able to be in that moment? Because that happened in the past. And if it happened in the past, it's definitely going to be able to repeat itself. So I think part of what that means to me is you're going to feel like an imposter when the thing that you're seeking is not going to complement you. Many that I've talked to that were impacted at some point just kind of felt I'm going to take whatever job I can find. I'm going to take jobs that maybe have a different skill set associated with them that are not necessarily where I find the most joy and excitement. I'm going to take jobs that are a huge, huge, huge pay cut that kind of feel like a slap in the face to me. I'm going to take jobs in companies that I don't really identify well with and don't have any kind of passion for. And when you do that, you're almost guaranteeing to set yourself up for that imposter syndrome to be permanent because you're never going to have that environment that enables you to thrive. So I'd say for anyone that's feeling imposter syndrome, you really have to be able to get a grasp on when did I not feel that? When did I feel like I was unbelievable? And you have to be looking for that versus just looking for a job. I think that would probably be what I wish I would have known at that time because you're going to feel like an imposter when you don't feel like you're excelling. And the minute you feel like you're excelling, that's when you break free of that.
You mentioned finding fit and looking at companies you align with and roles that you fit well into. How did you do it in your experience?
So when I was impacted, I told you the nature of my role, things that support internal capabilities or internal teams. usually have a degree of thanklessness associated with them. And so I remember when I was looking for, my next move, thinking about what did I want to do, and I kept targeting roles that were similar and that were more either product or operations. And my thought process there was, well, this is what I was just doing. I know I'm good at it, even though I never felt a sense of actualization. What do they say? Like if you love what you do, you never work a day in your life. Everybody wants to be able to feel that. Everyone wants to find that role. That's maybe not a reality for every single person, but there is something in the middle. There is something in the middle where you're still getting replenished, even though your work is hard, even though you're putting in the long hours, right? Even though there's always going to be people conflict and, cross-functional team conflicts and resource constraints and all these things, you kind of still feel like that gratification when you leave your job every day of like, I did that thing, and here's what I have to show for it. And so while I was looking for my next move, I kept minimizing that on the stack rank and prioritizing, oh, I want a product role, or oh, I want this ops role. Oh, I want to make sure I'm leading a big team because that's what I was doing before. I want something with a higher title, and it has to make sure it's a leadership role because I don't want to be seen as someone who's getting demoted or, not taking something that's at least seen as lateral. I want to continue my career progression. And that was defined by all of those things, like more scope, higher title, versus what is that thing that's giving me joy and gratification and making me feel like this is where I should be. That time when you start to prioritize or be okay with the thing that actually gives you like satisfaction versus the thing that you think you should be doing. I think that's how I ended up moving to the role I have now versus what I was originally targeting.
The mix that you're describing, I really like that sense of it's challenging. It also reflects who I am as a person, what I really like to do, what lights me up. But then it's not just what I do, but it's also who I do it with, how I do it, etc. So all that is kind of the in that mix of fit. And the danger is if you don't have fit, even if you're great at the role, that in itself can also put you at risk too, because you're a painter in the midst of plumbers. You're just on a team that does not fit. And a lot of folks that are listening to the podcast or have been laid off, that's a very common experience where they're just on the wrong team or they're just working on the wrong thing, but their talents and skills and what they were brought to do is something completely different. But the role changed, the team changed, and that affected their self perspective. So coming back to really what lights you up is a very powerful part of the story.
I completely agree. Because you start to subscribe to that, right? You start to subscribe to now all these things happening on in your current team, which is chaos. It's like you said, you're a painter in midst of plumbers. And you instead of being able to differentiate that and saying, this is why this isn't working, you start to think, I'm just not a good plumber.
And so, fast forward, applying to all these roles, how did you start to rebuild your confidence and eliminate the imposter syndrome as you moved forward to your current role today?
A lot of it really started with the people interaction. The job pursuit process, it can be very robotic. You don't even know if you're actually talking to a real human, if it's an AI generated response. It's very sterile, and you almost kind of feel like you're just any other candidate. I think what differentiated this one was I had a conversation with the hiring manager. After that conversation, was like, hey, I think you'd be really great at this. I could totally see you in front of our customers succeeding. I'd love to continue this and kind of see where it goes. You feel like someone is finally rooting for you and they see all of these positive attributes of you that maybe you weren't even seeing yourself or you were starting to doubt. And I think that it starts to move in that direction of, okay, well, this person already is looking at me as a value add. Maybe I should be looking at myself that way too. So I think that shift really happens with the people before it happens with anything else. And then you start to think about, would I actually be doing in this role? Does it check all the boxes? Should I start to rethink about the boxes and the order of those boxes too? I remember I had sat down and started thinking about what are the main attributes for a role? Is it title? Is it the people culture? Is it the pay? Like, and how do I rank those? And at some point, it was title, scope, pay, people. Oh, and then I think work-life balance was somewhere on that list too. And towards the end of that process, it became work-life balance, people, scope, pay, title, and that was really hard to adjust to that mindset of saying I'm not somehow less capable. I'm not taking away like all this work and that I've done throughout these years to build upon my career and kind of progress in that journey is not suddenly being taken from me just because I prioritize a non-fancy title, just because I moved to being an individual contributor instead of managing a large team. That suddenly doesn't just go away. It's all additive. It's still there. It's still in my resume. It's still part of my history. I'm just making a choice now to prioritize the things that give me joy and that are a fit with where I'm at in my life. And those things even change depending on what's going on in your personal life. So it was just very refreshing to feel that enthusiasm and that encouragement from the people aspect.
One of the things I really like about what you just shared was you gave yourself permission to restructure your boxes. And thank you for so transparent in how you prioritize what really mattered in the next role you were looking for. And you described how on the day of the layoff, you went straight back into job search, but then throughout the process, you now have rejiggered your boxes. Work-life balance, fit on the team, and alignment with who you are as a person. This is something super critical because your next role really should more deeply reflect who you are, align with your values, and ultimately where you want to go.
Yeah. And I mean, also just to piggyback off of that, I can't stress enough the kind of your current situation. We are not going to be the same throughout our lives. So everything that worked for you before, all of the things that made sense for your boxes and their ranking order before, doesn't mean that it's a reflection of who you are in this moment. You could have a family that you're trying to build. You could be getting married. You could be moving. You could just wake up one day and say, I don't want to be this corporate person. I want to be XYZ. And that's okay. It's okay to change. It's okay to diversify. It's okay to want your job to complement your life in that moment. You're not ever forced to have to kind of follow this route until you die or you retire. You are a dynamic, living, breathing human being, and your life changes, and your job should be a complement to that.
Were there strengths that throughout this experience you discovered about yourself that you didn't know before?
Yes, I think some things that we kind of minimize and dismiss as maybe being skills because we just think they're just what we do on a daily basis and everyone has them. I didn't know how disciplined I was. I always kind of thought of myself as a little bit of a procrastinator, someone who does well in a structured and organized environment, but that's not necessarily one of my strengths. Something that I did throughout the process, which maybe some people thought was a little bit extreme, was I followed very, very disciplined schedule where I would still get up every morning. I would go to the gym at 5 a.m. I would be at my computer by 7. I would have a cup of coffee and let's call that my commute to work. And then from 8 to 5, that was my dedicated time to either finding a job, doing some type of certification and skilling, to looking for networking opportunities. Like it was very much repetitive and always time bound. And I never really moved away from that. I mean, my husband was working and he was traveling all the time and he would be like, hey, why don't you come with me? And I'd be like, that's going to be disruptive to my job search. Like, or I'm trying to prepare for this certification. Like, no, I got to go to work. He's like, you don't have a job. I'm like, no, I have a thing I'm committed to between 8 to 5 every day, and that's not changing. So I learned that I was extremely disciplined. And I think that was really refreshing to me because I was telling you earlier, kind of someone that's always felt like their identity was so much defined by their job. I was terrified that if I didn't have a job, I would just kind of fall off the deep end and just start to get lazy, not really have a clear, like defined schedule, not have any kind of goals. I knew that that was not going to work well with me. So that was one of the things that I discovered, which is refreshing.
Would you do it differently?
Um, Probably. I think that once I've, you know, confirmed that hey, you're not just gonna be this slob that sleeps until 1 and like applies for one job a week and just hopes something falls in your lap, I think I would have maybe given myself a little bit more grace and a little bit more freedom to explore, to have fun, to take advantage of this moment of having a strict obligation and deadline and saying, okay, well, this week I'm going to stick to my schedule. Next week I'm going to go backpack through Europe because this is the one time I get that opportunity. Just kind of giving myself that freedom to enjoy the time of not having a job versus penalizing myself for not getting a job quick enough.
That's great feedback, Tana. I always ask every one of our guests, what are you doing on your piece of the planet right now?
Like I mentioned, I landed in Google. Very, very, very happy about that. I always say I've been across the trifecta, but I saved the best for last. I'm a leader in the Google Cloud space. I sound a little tired. My voice is raspy. I've been at Google Cloud Next this entire week in Vegas. 37,000 steps a day. That was a very fun experience, but also very rewarding and gratifying. But outside of that, I'm really trying to figure out how I can use some of these experiences I've had to help others. As you know, there's an enormous pool of people who are in this state, and some maybe that have been here for a while and are still kind of trying to figure out what their next move is, and some who are being recently impacted. And if there's anything that I can do to help make their journey a little bit more tolerable and give direction, whether it's like interview support or brainstorming on job fits, maybe something a little bit more strategic. Let's figure out what your place in the world could be. Where can you add value? What kind of roles should you be pursuing? That's also something that I've started to take up and seeing how do I give back and make that process a little bit more manageable for someone else.
And thank you for doing that. I think that in our ascent towards our goals, it's very easy to forget how far we've come. And so looking around and helping others become more excellent, I mean, that is something that is incredibly powerful. All right, rapid fire questions as we wrap this up. Best career advice you've received?
The best career advice I ever received was that your your job is still just a job. It does not define you. Because once you start taking everything way too seriously and you don't have that distinction and kind of separation, that's when you're gonna let all of the bad things really get to you. And there's always gonna be bad things. There's always gonna be, issues and hiccups. And the best thing that you can do is just say, like, at the end of the day, this is still just a it's still just a job. And I'm more than that. I'm a whole person, a whole experience, a whole life.
Advice you would give to others that have been laid off recently?
I know it's hard. I know that you're struggling and you're doubting yourself and that you're sometimes feeling defeated, but there's always going to be a light at the end of the tunnel. You just have to be okay with that light looking a little different, maybe, than what you originally had expected it to be.
Well said, Diana. Thank you so much. One of the things I really enjoyed about this conversation, you brought us a real sense of clarity, but also empathy and really just thoughtfulness to what you've shared with the community today. And so these are valuable lessons. Thank you for the time.
No, thank you, Leo.
I appreciate it. Folks, this has been an incredible conversation with Diana. I hope you enjoyed this episode and hope you really pulled out a lot of the nuggets that she shared. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them below. I answer those personally. And please don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more videos like this. There'll also be links on the screen to our stories playlist, and you'll also see a link to another video that YouTube thinks you should enjoy. Thank you, and we'll see you next time.